Hello and welcome to the KubeBuilder Controller Runtime and Controller Tools meeting for Thursday, April 8th, 2021. As a reminder, this is being recorded, so don't say anything you don't want uploaded to YouTube. All right, looks like we have a relatively short agenda for today. So I think I have the first item. There might be some debate, so we can probably move this to last. So let's see. The second item is the just release check-in. Let's see. Is one of Camila? Do you want to, or Eric? Do you want to give a?
I push a pull request for the RC, but I would like to wait a small bug fix that was pushed by Jesus. In my opinion, we can move on with the RC today, and the bug fix we can address for the stable release, unless someone has any objection. I think this is the goal. If we find any issue, we will solve before the stable one.
Okay, sounds good. All right. And then we have plan for injector interface deprecation.
Yeah, hi. So I just wanted to bring up this topic for discussion in this forum. So it's regarding the plan for deprecating the injector interface. So a little background here. So the injector package is used to propagate any of the dependencies, maybe client or cache or config, from the controller manager to the other components which are registered with it. So it was decided earlier that we would be deprecating this package since it's essentially not scalable to maintain a code base where we have to implement this interface methods for all the types which we may be adding. But the problem here is that it's not simple to remove all of it at once, since this is being extensively used internally in the controller runtime itself. So I've provided a rough list of where it's used in the issue. So I just wanted to bring this up so that we can talk about this or discuss this on a high level on how we would like to handle this. I don't have a particular alternative or a process to do this in mind right now, but I can gather some points from here and then create respective issues so that we can start working on this.
Yeah, I think just to follow up from like, at least from my concerns from my perspective, one of the main points of difficulty that I think we might encounter is that there are spots where we don't have dependencies that need to be passed to things until later. And so one of like the things that enables a lot of our kind of just like passing this thing and things will work, as opposed to having like giant explicit initialization blobs at various times, or like creating something, adding it to the manager, and then like later initializing a dependency somehow, is the dependency injection code. And like some of it can be replaced in a pretty straightforward manner. So like obviously like what we've been doing in our KubeBuilder scaffolded code, where instead of implementing inject client on the scaffolded types, we call get client and stuff like that. But like there's points internally where that is a lot harder to do. I seem to recall like the sources are going to be difficult there, and stuff like that. The sources, predicates, controllers might have issues. The controller object might have issues as well. So either we're going to need to like work out how to do that without impacting the usability, or we're going to need to like design a new kind of injection method, which might be the, like, we might end up just having to go with like the lesser of two evils and just have a better designed injection system through like context or something. But that is I think the thing to think about as you're doing this.
Okay.
So this does sound like a pretty extensive design change, and I think we knew it was going to be, but at the time when we were like initially talking about this and just kind of hand waved it, we didn't really think about it. So I'm wondering if this is grounds for like an EP, or if this is just a whole bunch of somewhat connected changes that need to happen iteratively. I'm wondering about your thoughts on this.
I think it's probably grounds for, like, the way I would probably handle this would be like, do like a couple prototypes and then maybe post the prototypes, and then maybe like explicitly, as this is a prototype, do not merge, we're just going to use this to see how it looks, and then maybe take that and write up a little enhancement proposal from what we decide, more as documentation for what's going on, and like a summary of our discussion, and then go from there. Because I think this is one of the cases where like actually going through and like doing it for some of the gnarlier spots, and B, like actually seeing the code and seeing how it looks are going to inform a lot more. Not that they don't usually, but like, yeah. I expect that like trying to do it partially, we're gonna, and then writing an EP and then like finishing up or something, as opposed to a more fleshed out prototype, like we're gonna end up missing spots and having issues that we haven't foreseen. So I think the prototype's going to be very important.
I agree with that. Yeah, that's all I was going to say. I agree with that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say the one thing I do not want is a big fat design upfront, because I think no one today really knows how we're using this everywhere. Some of the things you said initially, I know are not true solely, like the source doesn't use its channel, the controller doesn't use anything anymore today, but it was true in the past. So I think it needs to be someone just goes through all of this, finds out the spots that don't have an obvious thing to do, and then based on that, we have a prototype and probably design.
There are also like, at least there were a couple of spots where like things are passed through, and so like X doesn't need it, but X's dependencies need it. I think there's still at least one or two of those where like we pass through the inject func because a child's object needs it, not because like the base dependency needs it.
I think it's like when you add a runnable, you, depending on what kind of runnable it was, you do that. So yeah, it's like this. I remember looking through all the layers of calls, and it's quite a big chain depending on what you pass in. And I mean, in a lot of cases, like you're saying, it's really difficult to get around that without using some sort of like interface injection. So that does worry me a little bit as well. So I guess those will be the most difficult parts. But like on the same side of the coin, there are some areas where they can be fairly easily removed because they're shallow. But yeah, I agree. A prototype is important.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
And oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I also want to mention that especially the fact that we have this whole long chain thing is a reason why we should do this, because people create issues where they somewhere very down some call chain don't have a dependency anymore they expected to have. And I'm seeing this pull request and I have literally no idea how this was supposed to work and if the change is going to do what it's supposed to do, because it's so invisible the way it's done today. And I think that needs improvement.
Yeah, and I think also in our final design, we probably want to draw a very clear line between things that are usable internally and things that are usable by like end user types, kind of. I don't, or at least think about that. I don't particularly like drawing that distinction usually, but we may want to say like, there is no guarantee that these types will be, there is no particular guarantee that anything will be passed through in the new system. If we end up with something dependency injecty, we might want to say like, we don't guarantee it until we feel more comfortable with it. And then once we feel more comfortable with it, we can say like, okay, these dependencies will be there. But like, and that way, hopefully maybe start to avoid people depending on it, at least for a bit. That might be optimistic in terms of how people deal with things, but we can at least potentially put out a statement.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I just quickly want to touch on this as a final point for me. So there are people that probably depend on this as an API, but like I guess the real question is it necessary as an API? Like, is there another way around this? Because I think a lot of the injection code that I've seen, in fact, most of it is internal to controller runtime. I don't think there's much of a need to actually use it outside of controller runtime, because people, like, while they are doing complex things with controller runtime APIs, they are pretty much already set up at the point at which people use them and don't need resource injection. I'm sure there are people who are using them, but it's probably a small subset of people. At least that's anecdata. So if anybody has any contrary points, please let me know.
Yeah, I think it's likely legacy code from when we encourage that pattern, like more explicitly. That kind of matches what I've seen. All right, if no one else has any opinions on the matter, we can move on to the last thing, which is actually the first thing. Oh, nope. Oh, okay. Yeah. Camila, did you want to say anything about that last thing, and then we'll go on to my first thing?
Sure. It's very fast. I just would like to share that PR. The PR is for we document the plugins stuff and how people can create their own plugin. As a follow-up, it has a folk that you'd like to create a tutorial as well with some examples. So I would like to kindly ask if he's for who has interest on that, try to help you on the reviews. Would be nice. We get to that merge.
Awesome. All right. So for the last thing, I have at various points, we have at various points come across like basically issues with the, okay, sorry, step back. Currently the client, if there is no entry in the cache, or if there's not entry, if there is no, if an object is not currently being cached and you try to get that object, it will start establishing a cache. For a couple of reasons, this has caused us design issues. I think it caused us design issues when we were looking at the initial, like our initial attempts at like how do you do a filtered list watch? And I recently encountered a scenario with an end user in which they started using V2 of their CRD in some places in their code base. In other places, they used V1. And they didn't quite realize that this would establish two caches. And which is like an easy mistake to make, I think, if you're not, especially if you're not like super duper thinking about like the implications of that. And then they ended up starting to get bugs where like state was lagging behind because they were getting watch notifications from V1 and then fetching from the cache of V2, which was like ever so slightly behind. And it manifested as like really weird, occasionally kind of flaky bugs. And so I think we should either reconsider that behavior or make it optional and make it instead be like an error if you try to get something from the cache that you haven't watched beforehand, and then maybe make an option to like add something to the cache without explicitly setting it up as a watch. Or maybe figure out like if there's some mitigations or protections against things we can do, especially the V1 versus V2. I'm surprised I haven't seen anyone else hit that as people start to introduce multiple versions to their code base. So does anyone else have thoughts on this? And if not, I just wanted to get it out in front of people to think about.
Was
I think I will go ahead.
dynamically starting a cache like a feature, or is that just incidental in the implementation?
It was a feature. It was kind of like oh, we want the cache to be as completely transparent to people as possible. So like if you try to get something that's not cached but like is on the API server, we want it to be, or you try to get a type that's not cached but is available like in general, we want the cache client to act exactly as a live client would act, in which case we need to auto establish a cache. So it was originally intended as a feature. I think in many cases that I've seen practically, people don't get stuff that they haven't set up in a controller watch with a relation. And like getting stuff that you haven't set up with an explicit relation from the cache may kind of be an anti-pattern, but that's not always the case. And so like someone pointed out that they have encountered this being useful before. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
So it's probably hard to get a good impression on how useful or not this is overall. I can just say from my personal experience that literally everyone was surprised by this behavior and even more confused once they learned that the unstructured are excluded from this, which is why we now added an option to exclude other things as well if you want that. And I think I personally would prefer to be a more explicit API where you have to opt in for everything you want to cache and everything else you will just get from the API directly. Also because the cache has some implications, like it can be a bit stale. And that is something people need to be aware of.
Yeah, that surprisingness matches some of the stuff I've seen too. That's a good point. I'd forgotten about like we have gotten a number of bug reports too about like people. Yeah, exactly that. Especially the unstructured decision, which has its reasons. I'm not sure either way was better, but yeah. Okay, if folks can weigh in on that bug, that would be super useful. And like I have some ideas about like maybe what we could tweak for new options, maybe make it so you can turn it off or whatever. But if other folks have ideas on like what to kind of replace it with or how to modify it, it would be great if you could weigh in as well.
Yeah, for what it's worth, that was basically my same thinking when I read this bug just before the meeting started. This issue, like, totally agree with things that are stated here. Generally agree with all the other things that people have stated in this meeting. Like, the caching is super helpful. In fact, very important in a lot of circumstances to direct developers toward caching and ensure that nobody's accidentally not caching when they're using a client, for example. But the big question mark is like, okay, given these issues in front of us with what we have right now, what's the alternative? And weighing that against the alternative will be probably the interesting thing. So I'm kind of eager to see actually some ideas of what specifically we might consider otherwise.
All right. I think that's everything on the agenda for today. Does anybody else have anything that they'd like to talk about? All right. If not, I will see everyone in a couple weeks. Talk to y'all later.
Thanks. Yeah.
Bye.